Well, today's high intensity tech training begins now as we take a look at the evolution of connectivity and security and the shift we've all witnessed as connectivity has evolved from traditional bandwidth and fixed circuits into the software defined emergence of SD-WAN and augmented now by the agility, the scalability, and the embedded security of SASE and NAS. Now, as is always the case, these shifts and evolutions create massive opportunities for advisors in becoming strategic infrastructure partners. Today, we'll learn the capabilities, the use cases, and the strategic benefits involved to help you guide your clients in their network transformation decisions. Your comments and your questions are welcome in the chat window, to which our presenters will respond both during and after today's event. They may even show up in your driveway. Today, we welcome back to the Tuesday call Telarus VP of Network and Mobility, Graeme Scott. He's joined today by Director of Sales Engineering, Bob Greenough. Bob, Graeme, welcome to you both. How you doing?
Thanks, Doug. Really excited to be here and excited to have my man Bob here joining us. As Doug mentioned at the outset, it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so because of that, we wanted to really talk through some of the ways that cybersecurity is tying into network solutions. And of course, what better way to do that than breaking down SD-WAN and SASE. So when I'm out in the field having conversations with tech advisors, a lot of questions surround, hey, like, how do SASE and SD-WAN kind of work together? Are they competitive products? Are they complementary products? How do we get from one to the other? So I thought today that Bob and I would come on here and just kind of trace through how we got where we are, what SASE is, and how it works together with SD-WAN to provide a more secure networking environment. So Chandler, if you want to go ahead and kick it over to next slide. Next slide after this one. So I think it's always important to kind of take a look at and trace the evolution of how we got to where we are. So if you remember, those of you who've been around for a while, and I know by a bunch of the names on the call here that we've got some veterans in the crowd, and we appreciate you guys, but you probably remember selling MPLS back in the day, traditional bandwidth, and those were basically fixed circuits, and we had a lot of lengthy provisioning going on there. Getting network in place was really a challenge, and we spent a lot of our time babysitting circuits as they went in and making sure that everything was up and ready to go. When SD-WAN first appeared on the scene, we really kind of talked about it in the context of an MPLS replacement, something that could come in and give you a lot of the functionality that you had with MPLS, provide a lot of the secure connectivity, and give you that option a lot more affordably and way easier to manage. So that's how we went from MPLS to SD-WAN. And of course, as we evolve into the future, enterprises, customers, businesses out there are demanding agility and scalability. And of course, they want that security to work hand in hand with that SD-WAN solution. And that's where we've kind of got into the SASE space. And then, of course, network as a service, which we'll talk about here at the end. So that's kind of our basic timeline, our agenda for today. Let's go ahead and kick it over to the next slide. And I'm going to bring in my man, Bob Greenough. Bob is our Director of Sales Engineering. Bob has literally, Bob, hundreds of these kinds of conversations every month. So I think if you could just, for the folks, kind of break down a little bit where we started with MPLS and how SD-WAN sort of first came on the scene as a replacement for MPLS.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of centralize on something that you have here on the slide. MPLS has been around forever. It was the way the world ran. It still is to some degree. I mean, the backbone of the internet is largely similar to the MPLS networks we've seen in large enterprises, right? But one of the main reasons being it is incredibly reliable. But drawing attention to and this kind of sets up why the move to SD-WAN, but the rigid point-to-point links, specifically the word rigid, right? These are predefined routes, things that have to be thought through and configured beforehand. Like first and foremost, you have to talk about where the internet drain is, right? Essentially, where does the traffic from all these sites in the network have to go to get out to the internet? Is it a centralized model, like you set up there in a centralized hub model? If so, pretty big single point of failure. Yeah. So you have to start talking about redundancy, building that in. If a link goes down, you can maybe build up some meshing where you can get, maybe end around that outage and go through a different site. But the meshing Just use your imagination as to how complex that can get. I mean, literally just spaghetti, throw it against the wall, what it could look like, right? And we're not even talking about using BGP for failover and that sort of thing. So that's what's kind of driving this, I'd say agnostic as far as connection and providers, right? Um, you mentioned it's a replacement for the traditional MPLS. You're spot on there. But what we started seeing, though, because of the flexibility of SD-WAN, was it was a tool for the migration away from it. It wasn't a rip and replace, which is scary for any network administrator, any systems administrator. It's absolutely terrifying. What you could do is turn up the SD-WAN solution and start building your policies, your failover, your routes, all that kind of thing, and then gradually moving sites over. And eventually you get to a point where you just unplug the PE router that's handling the MPLS and you're up and running on the new SD-WAN solution. And so it made it, in addition to being a replacement, it really enabled the move to itself. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, not only was it incredibly complex, as I think you laid out fairly well there, I think that number on the bottom really hits home why a lot of businesses embrace this technology. 40% cost savings. As we know, those of you who see me do an Ascend event, businesses ultimately care about two things, right? Making money and saving money. And 40% is a pretty hard number to walk away from. So SD-WAN really transformed the way businesses networked, more of a distributed site type architecture. And then that 40% savings, I think, was super significant for most companies here. We're at about a 70% adoption rate as of last year with SD-WAN. So I think that really tells you how we've evolved from MPLS. And to your point, Bob, it's still out there. We still see it every now and then, but just much, much less common.
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way, I think we're getting to this a little bit later in kind of the timeline, but the rise of cloud and everything moving to the cloud and how we had to find creative ways to get there, efficient ways to get there. That really kind of again forced the move away from the MPLS model to SD-WAN. I mean, you could spin up an SD-WAN device in AWS or Azure, just I mean, like that. You just go to the marketplace to spin it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. What I want to do here is we're going to kind of go through a case study. So this is an example of where SD-WAN was a real effective tool for this organization. So in this case, Bob, we have a distributed enterprise, right? They've got multiple locations across the geography. They had MPLS in place, but had some challenges there. And so ended up moving over to SD-WAN. So kind of, this is a very typical conversation that you guys would have had a couple of years ago. Kind of walk us through where this would have started and how we would have got to where we have SD-WAN deployed.
Yeah, so the challenges you mentioned, that's typically where almost all of these start. And of course, just the cost, the first one you mentioned, right? They're looking at this build, they're literally hemorrhaging money. They're like, there's got to be a better way to do this. We've been doing this for 20 years now. Technology moves fast. What should we be doing? And that's typically where the conversation comes to us, right? But the SaaS application performance is a really common refrain around MPLS. If you're really, really good, if you're a top level CCIE guy, you can get the MPLS just humming along, no problem, right? But that's a CCIE person, and that's somebody who's commanding a lot of money to do that for you. So with the SD-WAN, again, using that as a tool to kind of move over to a more agnostic solution, a lot, depending on the provider, these SD-WAN suppliers can have, it can be a plug and play solution. Now, when you have all of these distributed locations, that too becomes a lot more palatable, right? So you don't have to have a truck roll. You can literally have these boxes shipped out to somebody, color-coded cables, color-coded instructions, and really anybody that can turn a screwdriver can set this thing up, plug it in and turn it on, and it's ready to go. It's rocking and rolling. So from a retail chain and anything really distributed like this, as far as locations goes, that's tasty. That's a tasty carrot.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So, end result here, a lot of these organizations move to SD-WAN. We can see the value of that change. All the characteristics of SD-WAN provided a tremendous amount of value. Some of them similar to what they had at MPLS, but a little bit of enhancements there. Again, that big number at the bottom there, this case study here, 35% cost reduction and faster point of sale. So it's all about money at the end of the day, right? That's really what it comes down to for organizations. You've got to be able to show that ROI. So, all right, so there we are. We've got SD-WAN. It's deployed. It's doing its job. It's doing things. But then the world changed right around, I don't know, 2020. we had a fairly significant incident that happened here globally. Anybody want to jump in the chat? Let us know what that is. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Get one guess.
Yeah, it got one big guess in 2020. What happened that changed a lot of things? And Chandler, if you want to move to the next slide, COVID. Yeah, that's right, Andy. We had COVID hit. And what happened during COVID? Well, things shut down, and we basically told everybody, hey, take this laptop and go home. Okay. But the problem was people still needed to work and people still needed to access all of these applications, all of these things that are existing, within the enterprise. So we had a new problem that we had to solve, right? We had all of these remote workers that needed to get access to things. And so we needed new tools to talk with SD-WAN, and SASE was born.
By the way, fun fact, the term SASE came about from Gartner in 2019. Talk about timing.
Yeah.
Right? Just in time. But yeah, I mean, you nailed it, Graham. So this wasn't, when we went through this, it wasn't your typical IT cycle in that you had months or even a year to figure it out, right? Idle change management? No, let's throw that out the window. It was close it up, get everybody home now. There was some time, maybe you had some laptops on hand to send people home with, but generally you didn't. I mean, especially if everybody was, at a single location. So, and even if you decided like, okay, let's get everybody laptops quick, by the time this was happening, by the time the shutdown was happening, supply chain was already substantially disrupted.
Right.
So there was no guarantee you were going to get them on time. There was, long story short, this was all done on the fly. And we went from having a pretty well-defined, managed, and understood network edge, and we flipped that overnight, 180 degrees. In that moment, if you ask somebody to diagram the network, the current network, it'd just be a big question mark on a Visio. That's
right.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all of a sudden you have this massive shift in traffic, as you said, right? 85% of traffic now flows directly to the internet destinations, bypassing all of our traditional security. We've got massive issues with breaches. We've got, as a result of that, network outages. So all of a sudden we've got these challenges. And to your point earlier, Bob, we also needed to make sure that those individuals that were working remote had access to all of these cloud applications that we needed them to work with. And it had to be reliable. It had to be safe and secure. So SASE came about. And again, to your point, it had been really kind of just coined right before that. But what SASE really was a framework. And I think, it's really important to kind of understand this distinction. It's not necessarily a product. It's basically a framework where we can bring together a series of products to work together, to work in unison, to achieve the goal of a safer, more secure network. So Chandler, if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. So here's kind of a breakout of the evolution. And Bob, if you want to kind of walk us through this, we've touched on a few of these things, but really this is kind of illustrates well, I think, how we evolved to this and where the need for a different approach, i.e. SASE, came into play.
Yeah, and again, we're going to beat the heck out of this, or we have beaten the heck out of it already, but the pandemic forced all of this to happen almost immediately. It had been building for some time now. Back in the day, it was just basically a firewall at the edge, and maybe you had, if you were fancy, you had some web filtering software, like what was the one back in the day? WebSense, I think.
Yeah.
If you were working and you try to go to a website you shouldn't, it would pop up the bad monkey kind of, window and tell you can't do this, and maybe your manager was notified depending on the severity, but that was it. In came, like you said, the pandemic, and it forced us to kind of reevaluate, okay, how do we kind of bring this all under one roof, under a framework, right? And a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between SD-WAN and SASE? Explain the difference. And really, they're two totally different things. SD-WAN is a product, as you mentioned, right? SASE is the framework. SD-WAN is just one of the many products. You got the web gateways, the CASB, ZTNA, firewalls, all of that kind of comes together under this umbrella and gives you a direction. One thing I wanted to mention though, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, it's frequently misunderstood that to implement the SASE framework, you have to do all of this. You don't. You could take pieces and, depending on what your business needs are, depending on where your employees are, you don't have to have all of this. But it's just a framework to guide you along that path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a framework where we can add these pieces to the framework based on what we need for our organization. Maybe we don't have a lot of remote workers. We don't need a zero trust. I mean, I would argue that a lot of people, you still probably should have it. But yeah, there's a lot of different components, and SD-WAN is one component of the overall SASE picture. So when we look at the Teleris landscape and we look at the suppliers that are in it, small, medium business and mid enterprise in particular want to buy these kind of products from one supplier. And as such, it's been marketed as SASE. It's a product. But in reality, again, it is a framework where you're combining multiple products together into a cohesive strategy to deliver a secure and reliable network.
Well said.
Yeah,
Well,
there we go. All right, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through a couple of examples here for you, a couple of examples of where an organization evolved from an SD-WAN environment, added these elements of SASE to provide them with the outcome that they wanted, which again was a safe and secure network. One piece of information that I want to make sure that everybody kind of sees before we move on from this slide: 60% of enterprises will implement comprehensive SASE strategies by the end of this year. Okay. So that's in the enterprise space. We know that, in mid-market and SMB, that's going to be a little bit less as they kind of lag a little bit. But if you're somebody who lives in that SMB space, you sell a lot to mid-markets, this is coming, and it's good to understand what it is, how it works, and how your customers can benefit from it. So we've got a couple of quick case studies we're going to run through here, and then we'll open it up to any questions. So let's go ahead and move to the next case study. I think, Bob, this is, speaking of the pandemic, the healthcare industry was one that was tremendously impacted, right?
a little bit.
We saw a lot of change there. So kind of walk us through how this organization or a healthcare provider would have started with an SD-WAN environment. They were probably already using SD-WAN and then had to add all these elements around it to build more, to utilize that SASE framework.
Yeah. So, and by the way, healthcare, there's healthcare, government, and finance. Those three verticals are exceedingly slow to move and to change. So the fact that they made this big change at the speed they made this change after the pandemic really shows you how critical it became. People suddenly became aware, like, hey, this is a problem which we need to solve for now, right? But with this specific one, I think it's important to show the difference between what is the difference between VPN and ZTNA, right? VPNs basically just offer secure encrypted tunnels for data transmission. Okay, they really don't do anything outside of that. They give you access into a network. That's it. It's especially handy on public Wi-Fi networks, ensuring privacy and security, right? But the problem with VPNs, just the VPN, absent any other controls, you basically now greenlit that device and that user full access to the internal network. And then again, going back to the pandemic scenario where it was impossible to send everybody home quickly with a secured laptop or some sort of device like that, you're basically just telling people, hey, download this VPN client on your machine, get logged in, you're good to go. You don't know anything about that machine.
Right.
You don't know if it's already been compromised, and now you're letting this on your network, right? So when we brought up the concept of zero trust, in that it's the concept of least privilege, and absolutely every user, every device, every resource that's accessed, whether it's cloud, whether it's on-prem, gets challenged. There is no implied trust like there is with a VPN, as it says, zero trust. And it's least privilege, meaning you only have the access to the least amount of things that you need to do your job, or that the device needs to function, or whatever it happens to be. The other thing was, as we scattered people off, there's going to be some other terms we'll talk about, CASB and all that kind of thing. But where the ZTNA, the network access, really shines is when you have that highly distributed remote or even road warrior workforce accessing applications. You might not know where they are, but are they in the cloud? Are they on-prem? Are they everywhere? Right? So that's the strength of it. And that's really what kind of sealed the deal for this one.
Yeah. So I always like to talk about ZTNA versus VPN. Like if I go to a bar, right? If I get through the door at the bar, I can go anywhere I want now, right? I can go order drinks, I can do whatever. Whereas ZTNA is more like, okay, great. I get ID'd at the door. When I go to sit down and have a drink, I get ID'd again. I get up, I walk around and come back to the bar, I get ID'd again. I want to go into the back room, the VIP area, I get ID'd again. Just this constant verification of who you are we're not going to trust that you're legal and you're supposed to be here. So I love, this was something that was adopted, and, we had to get there really with everybody being distributed. The attack vector on organizations just became so much wider that you had to have a way to protect this data transmission coming from remote workers. So good example here. Anything else? I mean, let's talk a little bit about the CASB type environment. And obviously, in this scenario with a healthcare provider, HIPAA was a concern. So how did some of these SASE solutions address that?
So HIPAA's fun. If any of you are really, really bored and you want to sit and read through the security rule within HIPAA that is kind of governs what we do, there's a lot of ambiguity there. You'll actually see a phrase called reasonable and appropriate, and with no explanation of what that means. There are some things that are actually hard requirements, right? And don't press me on what those are within HIPAA at the moment. But there are also things that are considered addressable within HIPAA. And what addressable means is we say you should do this. But if you can't do this, in lieu of that, you have to then document the policies, procedures, and safeguards you put in effect in lieu of that. One of those is encryption. A lot of people assume that, hey, everything, data at rest, in motion, whatever, it's got to be encrypted because HIPAA requires it. It doesn't. It's addressable. Where that came into play, especially with the VPN thing, VPNs, as it says, it's overhead. There's performance hits, there's all sorts of things that you just don't want from a remote workforce, right? You want them high speed, low drag. So the ability to move to something like a ZTNA, get rid of that overhead, and still have the reasonable and appropriate measures in place documented would satisfy those I shouldn't say HIPAA requirements, those HIPAA bullet points. Let's call them bullet points.
Yeah. And I love that, right? So in this example here, we meet the compliance standards of HIPAA, as vague as they are in some cases, right? But we meet. Yep. We've got faster access for our remote clinicians, our staff that is out there doing their thing. And overall, because we put all this into a framework and everything talks to one another and everything works together, we've reduced our overhead. We don't have all these different portals. We don't have all these different things going on. We've created an environment that is much more simple to manage for that IT staff. Chandler, let's move on to the next case study here. Another great scenario where SASE has been fairly well received is in the manufacturing industry. And Bob, walk us through, kind of a typical manufacturing type environment and where, in this scenario, SASE really kind of helped this customer out quite a bit.
Yeah, so manufacturing's an interesting one. There are an incredible amount of devices, whether they're IoT, whether they're IP-based or not, that typically get overlooked from a security standpoint, right? And some of these things might be reporting to a cloud service somewhere. And absent any other, absent CASB or something like that, you really have no visibility into how it's communicating, right? So CASB, Cloud Access Service Broker, or Cloud Access Security Broker, excuse me, I can say that. It's typically something you see more commonly in a manufacturing or a heavily on-premise business. Now, again, you see there's two services listed here, right? We talked earlier about how you don't need to have them all. You can see this one only used two, Firewall as a Service and CASB. We get a common question about, well, why wouldn't you go ZTNA in this instance? Why go CASB? Why go Firewall as a Service? Excellent question. You guys are full of them today. There's a lot of overlap in the problems that they solve, being honest. But there are two main differences. CASB is typically something you see when you don't have that highly distributed workforce, right? Maybe it's just everything's centralized here, this manufacturing location, accessing cloud resources, that's it. As I mentioned earlier, though, ZTNA is the better choice for if you have everybody kind of wandering around. They're all over the US. They scatter their sticks to the wind. You have no idea where they're accessing the applications, sometimes over questionable Wi-Fi. Pro tip, though, maybe you have a hybrid and you can do both. That wasn't the case with this one here, but yeah, the CASB piece was huge. That was the big one with all of the IoT type devices. And how do we know what the heck they're talking to, or how they're interacting with the cloud services? Uh-oh. Did we lose you, Graeme?
Yeah, I'm back.
Got you back. All right.
Got some work
Hey,
going
do you
on.
have SD WAN at your house? Secondary circuit? Just curious.
Yeah, I do. It just took a minute to fail over there. I am the wireless guy, right? So I've got my wireless backup.
There you go.
So I do apologize about that, folks. We got some work going on at the house here, which is causing some challenges. But Bob, I'm sure your explanation was spot on. I kind of missed the first part of it with the one the one thing I love about this is we talk about remote workforce. It's not always people that are connecting to the network, right? In this case, it's things, right? IoT space, it's things. And again, we've got different tools in the tool chest where we can address the issues of access based on the needs of whatever that thing is, right? It can be people, it can be IoT devices, whatever it is. We give them the proper access. We give them the access they need in an efficient manner. So love the example of the manufacturing because it really highlights how the different needs of different devices can be present. So
Absolutely.
let's go ahead and move on here. Chandler, yeah. So let's just sort of break it down again. So where are we going with all this stuff, right? So we've talked about where we started with MPLS, little evolution to SD-WAN. We talked about how now we've brought sort of SASE into the equation here. And really single vendor solutions are becoming more and more popular with customers, right? They want to buy as much of this from one supplier as we can, somewhere between 80 and 87%, depending on which study you look at. Let's talk a little bit quickly, Bob, just about what's next, right? We're hearing a lot about conversations like NAS, network as a service, and all of these tools as they evolve. Talk a little bit about how you see that kind of merging with SASE, with SD-WAN to provide a truly flexible, scalable, and agile, secure network for end users.
Yeah, so bringing all of this together under network as a service, which I think you're going to see, the SASE conversation, SD-WAN, they're going to be, it'll look like the individual point solutions that are SASE, now all of it rolled under kind of network as a service, which basically is defined as anything, you're talking about the connectivity, you're talking about the infrastructure, you're talking about all of that as a managed entity, right? And to your point, more and more people are looking for, a single hand to shake. They're looking for somebody that can source all of this. And it's not necessarily that they're looking for this as, we want to reduce headcount. What they're realizing is this is moving so fast and the threat vectors are changing. They're all over the place. They can't keep tabs on it. They need somebody to augment their team. And that's where we're seeing kind of the single throat to choke, single hand to shake, whatever you want to call it. They're benefiting from the economies of that scale. Sorry, I just looked at that question that came up in the chat. Spot on, Chuck. Thank you. So yes, the network as a service conversation, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. To your point, if I have 10 conversations or even 100 conversations about multiple point solutions and how we do this, I'd say probably 90% are how can we do this under one single pane of glass, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So lots to look at, lots to keep our eye on for what's coming down the pipe here. Chandler, let's go ahead and move to our next slide here. I think just to kind of wrap a bow on this, if we can, SD-WAN really kind of came in and solved performance issues, right? We had challenges with MPLS and some of the things that were happening. It made it easier to perform, for the network to perform. SASE came in and solved not only that performance by utilizing the components of SD-WAN, but also brought security into the mix, brought those two solutions together, along with others, in a framework that not only made the network perform, but made it secure. And I think that is the sort of wrapping this all in a bow, putting that together. So any comments there, Bob, before I drop some discovery questions for the folks?
I would say selfishly, when I have these conversations, having this framework to kind of talk through things and then kind of lead into individual point solutions rather than going the other way makes the conversation so much easier for us. And I think it makes it more palatable to the customer as well. When you can start at a top kind of idea, a framework, and then address individual point solutions, identify a problem and say, okay, we got this piece we could plug in. We could put this, plug this piece in. From my end, it makes things a lot easier. And I think it does for the customer as well.
Yeah, I mean, great point, right? I mean, I always say this, nobody really wants to buy a product, they want to solve a problem, right? And so you got to really identify what the problem is, what's the challenge that they're having, and then we can find the solution under that SASE banner that makes the most sense for that customer. So let's move on to our last slide here, Chandler. We've got some great discovery questions here for you folks out there. I know you've got a lot of customers out there. You're wondering, hey, how do I start the conversation? How do I see if there's an opportunity here for a SASE solution? And Bob, I think you nailed it, right? It's really about diagnosing problems that are happening within the business. So we're not talking about SASE, we're talking about hybrid work, right? How has hybrid work impacted your network and security posture, right? Has that created challenges for you? You've got remote workers out there. How do you manage their access to the tools that they need within the organization? Another one here, are you still managing MPLS circuits or legacy VPN infrastructure? When we hear somebody say VPN, I mean, I think we should be looking at that. Hey, that's a great opportunity to talk
Yep.
about how that technology's evolved. VPN doesn't really solve the problem anymore. And I think that's the key, right? It used to, but it doesn't really anymore. It's become so much more sophisticated. It needs to evolve. Another question here.
By the way, Graham, on that previous one, really quickly,
Yeah.
the MPLS thing, legacy VPN, this is one of those conversations where you absolutely need to be talking to somebody above the person managing it. It has to
Yeah.
have buy-in from the decision makers. I mean, we say that a lot, but this is really one of those where you have to, because you're likely going to get a heavy amount of pushback from the doers, right? The people managing it. Simply because it's what they know. They're likely at a point in their careers where new stuff might be scary. You might get that arms crossed kind of, you're not going to come in here, dismantle my network and replace me mindset, which is unfortunately alive and well. So make sure you're having that specific one, ideally all of them, but this one especially at that top level.
Yeah, really, really great point, Bob. Thanks for jumping in on that one. That's a really good one. And these last two questions here, we are in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so they're kind of focused around the security aspects. How many security vendors are you currently juggling, right? Do you have a lot of different point solutions? Because remember, SASE is just a framework. A customer can go out and buy all these things on their own. The challenge is managing it all together and making sure they all work as one cohesively to accomplish the goal and solve the problem. So if they've got a bunch of different solutions they've bought, hey, how can we bring that under one umbrella and help you guys manage that better? So again, the problem is really management of it, not that they don't have the tools, it's managing those tools. And Bobby, you guys see that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when somebody comes to us saying they're looking to refresh their firewall, so they hit Dr. Google, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a ton of noise that comes at them. So they come to us and say, "Hey, help us, get through this noise to get to the signal. What are we really looking at here?" Um, and then when you bring somebody to the table, they can even drill it down, distill it down even further, and make it kind of an easy button.
Yeah, love it. And then finally, do security policies follow the user or are they tied to the buildings? That's one that we kind of hit a lot. You've still got some organizations out there that are fairly antiquated in their approach to this kind of stuff. Things have got to change here. Things have got to evolve to meet the demands of the modern workforce. So let's go ahead and open it up there for any questions. Chandler, bring Doug back here. Doug, a pretty lively chat, it looks
Yeah, we
like.
got a lot.
Yeah, a pretty lively chat. Yeah, any highlights there you want to bring? We got Bob the expert here, so let's drill him with some of these questions.
Absolutely. As we kicked into this, there were a lot of questions around the differences between SASE and SD-WAN, and I think we addressed those pretty well. But then one of the interesting facts that you brought up was the migration that occurred during the COVID, particularly period of time. Are there industries that were either making moves at that time or industries that have come alive since then that are still struggling with how to take care of those same issues at this point in time? And given where we're moving into NAS and other evolutionary technologies, what considerations can remain and what are the new considerations, especially around security and who's providing it, that we have to take a look at?
So what I've seen is we're a new normal now in that we are definitely mostly a hybrid workforce. However, there's some industries that, the first chance they got, nope, call them all back. Government was a big one to some degree. Federal government, I'd say, is a big one. Finance, of course. So we're seeing a lot of people come back into the office, but there are some vertical, I'd say actually every other vertical almost, not so much healthcare like the actual hospital facilities, but just about everything else that supports healthcare are they're embracing this remote workforce. So these conversations now for them are it's a constant reminder, it's a constant refresh with them. And then anytime, of course, something pops up on Gartner, we're having to address it and they come to us with it. But yeah, so finance, government, those are the ones that have been resistant to it and have kind of pulled everybody back into the office and away from the hybrid workforce.
Yeah, I think the story there that I get is there really is no one size fits all, right? Every even within an industry, you've got companies that take a different approach to this. And I think because of that, you really need to dig in on that discussion, right? When there's choice, when there's flexibility, there's opportunity for us as tech advisors to go in there and help navigate that. So, under that SASE framework, which pieces, Mr. Customer, best support your environment with your employees, right? Is it zero trust because you've got a distributed enterprise, or is it more of a CASB type environment where you've got people in a building? So, those are the kind of questions you want to ask, and it really is there's not one size that fits all, and I think that's kind of the big takeaway there.
Yeah. Even the manufacturing industry, the one we talked about, they typically have some sort of remote sales workforce. They're out there beating the streets. It might be small compared to the rest of the business, but it's going to be a hybrid conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert's asking here just in the chat if there are resources that advisors should be looking at and taking advantage of as they try to determine not only what are the availabilities of solutions, but what they can best ask their clients and discover from them in terms of evaluating those needs.
Yeah, this is a tough one for a matrix. I know people love matrices where you can kind of line it up and say, this one's got this and this one's got this. This product is kind of a tough one for that because it really is so specific to the business and what their environment looks like. Rob, I would just recommend looping in the sales engineering team. Bob and his team are just, they're really well versed. They spend a lot of time doing this. They have dozens of conversations every week, kind of focusing on these types of solutions and what might work best for each customer in different scenarios. So there are some resources out there. We do have some materials. The suppliers have provided materials. We've got some education materials as well, but we don't really have sort of a matrix for this. It's a tough product to do that. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and adding on to what you said, or drilling down further, it's an incredibly dynamic conversation. So when you start talking through these, it's very often that you go in thinking you're going to be talking about firewalls as a service, but then as you dig down into things, you might discover something like maybe a breach they had, and you learn more about how that breach happened. You're like, whoa, hang on a second, we're well beyond firewall as a service. We got to start looking at something else. So it's really tough to do if-then statements for that conversation, although we've certainly tried with solution view and whatnot. But yeah. TLDR, bring us in. We'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, and just to teach something, Josh Hazelhorse and I have an Inside the Win episode coming out that highlights exactly what you said, Bob, a conversation that started with a firewall upgrade, $150,000 in MRR later. The only thing we haven't sold them is firewalls, right? So, so that conversation definitely evolves, and sometimes the customer, what they think they need isn't really what they need. And
Spot on.
Team is here to help you guys with those conversations.
I'm not sure we're allowed to get through any HITT training without discussing AI just a little bit. And AI, of course, has brought around an increased need for connectivity, for power, for security. As we talk about this evolution in connectivity options and companies that are considering their next move, what role does AI considerations play in that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to be general on AI, I think there's a couple of things that I've got my eyes on. Number one, as far as what's going on with today's network, and Bob, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, just the stress that AI is putting on existing network infrastructures, just the demand is tremendous. So if you have any cracks, any fissures within the network architecture, those things are about to be exploited. Those things are about to bust open as these customers start to do their AI journey. The other piece that I have my eye on is, we talked a little bit about NAS and network as a service. You're going to see a world here pretty soon where, with network connectivity, you're not even going to need to place an order. AI is going to do it automatically for you. When they see a bottleneck, they need a little more bandwidth. AI will just go out and procure additional bandwidth for whatever it needs it for and then scale it back down. The AI ops conversation, which I know we've touched on a couple of times in the HITT series, very interesting. And that is a space that I've got my eye on. It's continuing to evolve. Bob, I'll throw over to you on the comments there.
Yeah, the other, since this is a security conversation, governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, that is now, people are becoming more and more aware of what's possible with AI, and even when we think we got our hands around it, something else becomes possible. The issue now is that with the meteoric rise and really adaptation of it, adoption of it, it's forcing these conversations about, I mean, even at like the state level. AI is being weaponized at some point. So we have to have these conversations. What's ethical? Do we need to revisit the Geneva Convention? I mean, things that we wouldn't have even thought about had AI not taken off like it did. So and by the way, there's also an education piece there that I run into where there's a lack of familiarity that they don't even know that they're using it. When I ask them, so what are you doing today with AI? They're like, well, nothing really, and you go to their website and there's a chatbot, you know. So then you realize where you're starting. You're like, whoa, okay, we got to start with education. But then unfortunately, we're having to back into the GRC conversation. I use that when I realize there's a big education piece. Let's start with the governance, risk, and compliance conversation. Make sure that the right data is going into the LLMs, the right people are accessing it. It's not hallucinating and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and last point on AI, we've talked a lot of today about what's coming into the net, like coming in to get network resources, right? Really, we got to have a conversation also about what's going out to these AI engines, right? What kind of data your employees are sending to ChatGPT and those kind of things. We really want to start to put some protections around that and make sure that proprietary information, proprietary data, CPI, whatever, you're talking is not going out to those kind of engines. So, talked a lot about what's coming in or trying to get in. We also need to look at what's trying to get out.